United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So everybody's on the same page. This year's, we're just gonna do public comment now. While we're doing the interview process, we're not gonna be doing public comment during that period, of course. Any public comment at all? Don't zoom in on me, please. Please.
Break my camera.
Real nice.
Off to a good start.
Okay, so first one to be interviewed is Clemons, Richter, and Reiss. And we have Miss Vicky Kushto here today.
Where would you like me to go? Stay here, sit there?
Oh, wherever you would like,
It'd be better
ma'am.
if you could come up.
Yeah,
Maybe
sure,
if you
have a
sit up
seat.
front so that, especially because you're on camera.
Oh, great.
On camera.
Jimmy, sit
Give
here.
Mark someone to zoom in on.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Is this okay?
Whatever
Yes,
you
ma'am,
want,
wherever
wherever
you're
you're comfortable, wherever you're comfortable. I think what we'll do before when we get started is I'll just give you a brief overview of our township, our intention, and as we've been directed, each of the interviewees will receive the same questions. So we will do our best. This is our first time doing this, so. Anyway, so just to give you a little background, Upper Frederick, as you probably know, is a second-class township with approximately 3,700 residents. It's a 3-person board. 2 of us are present tonight. We are members of the Central Park Valley Regional Planning Commission, and along with Lower Frederick. Upper Frederick is, the 2 townships are considered the rural share of the CPVRPC. Central Park Valley Regional Planning Commission. We are the rural share.
Okay.
We have a vacant township manager position for employees, and then we have a bookkeeper / admin, which is Kate, who's present today. And then we have a public works department that's led by a director and 3 full-time employees. We do have other part-time employees throughout, the seasonal work. Bill and I are both newly elected this year, so we attended PSAT's training, and it was actually during our first PSAT session that they suggested that, hey, it's a good time when you are a new supervisor periodically to make sure that you're reviewing your solicitor position. So that's what we're doing here. There was no other reason than just it was recommended that we should probably do that. Throughout that process, we also, since we've been here, we also realized that our current solicitor, who is interviewing later this evening, Yergey from Yergey Daly, Yergey Daly firm has supported our township for 49 years.
Well,
So just to give you some background on where we are as a township and who we are. So I will, I don't know if you have an introduction you'd like to do first, or if you want us to jump into questions.
go ahead, you can just jump into questions.
Jump into questions? Okay. Do you want me to start?
Sure,
Sarah?
absolutely. Absolutely, please.
You can catch up to.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you describe your strategy for working with municipalities? For example, do you take more of a backseat approach or a more direct approach? And could you explain?
Sure. I think it depends on the municipality. Some municipalities need a little bit more help than others, depending on what their staffing situation is. So for our firm, we have 3 municipal solicitors. We all work in a group. We all handle and share work and cover for each other when's needed. For example, some of the municipalities that we have represented, we represented Warrington. Large township, second class also, but a lot of staff. So they had a little bit of less of a need because they had a lot of staff who could handle internal and everyday, day-to-day things. We also represent Wrightstown, surprisingly, for about 45 years now, also similar to your solicitor here. And they're a much smaller municipality like you are, and they have a majority of part-time staff. So when it comes to certain things, they need a little more help. So it entirely depends on the needs of the township and the manager and what the supervisors would like.
So what types of things do you help a smaller township with? When you say types of things, like what would you step in to do that a larger township can do on their own?
So going back to Wrightstown, just using them as an example, when they get plans in, either applications, conditional use applications, subdivision and land development plans, I will walk them through that entire process. So they contact me the day that it comes in. I provide them with all the information regarding deadlines, regarding when decisions have to be made. I track all of that for them, where in a larger municipality like Warrenton, they have a whole zoning division that does that on their own, and then they bring us in when they're ready. So it just depends, like I said, on the needs of the township. That's just one example.
Okay, great. That's a good one, especially in this township, because we don't have any specialists in planning issues.
Sure.
Okay, great. What are some of your biggest challenges that you have experienced working with municipalities?
I think we talked a little bit about that before the meeting even started. One of the biggest challenges is the way that municipalities work and the way that just government in general works. As we were talking about offline, it's not a fast process. It's everything has to be done at a public meeting, all decisions have to be voted on by a majority of the board, and there's a lot of public bidding that needs to take place for certain projects if you're over certain limits. So some of that is part of what I would say. Also, sometimes it's an inability to communicate as well with residents as you would like to. So something else that we were talking about offline was you guys are looking into potentially broadcasting your meetings, which I think is a great thing. When members of the township can watch the meetings and see what's happening, it's better for them because they can be more involved, they know what's happening. And I know in some of our townships too, they also make those videos available, like if they have a cable channel, they'll rebroadcast the meetings, not only when they're happening live, but there'll be a schedule where they'll be replayed, or some townships have the meetings available on their website, so you can go on and you can watch the meeting at any time. So that if this wasn't a convenient time for the members of your public, they would be able to watch it at a later time.
Great. Can you provide, so based on some of those big challenges, can you provide an example of how you've dealt with the challenge and how you advise the township? Like a specific example?
Sure, so, I'm trying to think of a good one. So for outreach, we weren't directly involved, but I'm just going back obviously to the townships that I have represented, but some of them do newsletters, which also helps to get word out to the public about what's going on, which I think is a very good thing. We've contributed articles in the past to that newsletter about items that the township thought would be of interest to residents that were more on the legal side, explaining things at meetings. I would say that type of thing.
Okay. Great. Do you currently support a township similar to Upper Frederick, surrounding Upper Frederick, and in Montgomery County? So it's a kind of a three-part question. We'll start with similar size to Upper Frederick. I know you mentioned Wrightstown.
Yes,
that's similar. That's a three-person board.
That's probably the most similar. It is Wrightstown. We also represent Haycock Township and Springfield Township. We don't represent anybody surrounding you. And currently, we don't represent any other municipalities in Montgomery County.
Okay. Are you looking to support someone in Monco? Is that why we're of interest to you if you don't normally support in Montgomery County?
Any municipality in the four-county area is interesting to me if they're looking for a solicitor.
Okay.
So I'm originally, and I still live in Delaware County. When I started out in the legal field 22 years ago now, I represented municipalities in Delaware and Chester County. And then when I left that position, I came out here to Bucks. And I've been representing municipalities out here in Bucks, but I do still have a municipality down in Chester County that I represent their zoning hearing board. So really anything in the Ford County area is of interest to me. Municipal law is the only kind of law I've ever practiced, so it might sound weird, but this interests me.
Yeah, okay, great. Do you want to ask next questions, or you want me to just keep going?
No, you keep on going, you're doing great. I mean, we all have the same questions, so either I can read or you can read. It doesn't matter to me, I just.
Same answer.
Yeah.
Okay. We would like to limit development here, since we're a rural township.
Sure.
Can you provide an example where you have successfully guided a municipality in this direction?
Sure, so I guess one of the best way, well, I could give you kind of two examples. So down in Wrightstown, we're actually we have a joint zoning ordinance between Wrightstown, Upper Makefield, and Newtown Township. So, and I actually, the solicitor for that jointure rotates, and this happens to be my turn. I'm currently the solicitor for that jointure as well. So that is actually one of the ways that we have limited development, in that Wrightstown, being rural, they had existing quarries and they kept the quarries, and bigger development and higher density went into the other two townships as part of that arrangement.
Okay, and that was Lower Makefield?
It's Lower Make, it's Newtown, and it's Wrightstown.
I used to live in Lower Makefield. So.
Okay.
I know the development going on there well.
So, and in
Years ago,
Warrington, we did what we called a conservation residential ordinance, which limited the development that was allowed. So we required new developments that were interested in using that feature to preserve 65% open space. And then they were able to build on the rest of it, but then there were additional incentives that were given in the ordinance, like preserving forest lands, preserving historic resources that allowed them to potentially get, bonus density, but we're able to save a good portion and preserve a good portion of the township that way by concentrating the development and requiring them to reserve so much open space.
Did you say there was a plan name for it? I'm sorry, when you said in the plan, required new development in the plan. Was there a plan name? I'm sorry,
No, I may have just meant in the development plan.
Got it.
It was a zoning ordinance. That was an amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
What ordinance is that?
In Warrington, it was their zoning ordinance. It was called a conservation residential subdivision. And they did it in their agricultural areas, in their agricultural zoning areas. They also had a program down there that we came in once it was already in place called transferable development rights, where the whole point was to sell rights to preserve property and transfer those development rights onto other areas of the township, so that you, again, to concentrate development in one particular area and encourage other areas to be preserved.
Okay. How would you approach reviewing our ordinances in order to minimize the risk of development?
So the best way would be to take a look, obviously, at what you have existing now, what the existing zoning ordinances are. There would also be opportunities, you're part of this planning commission. Do they review ordinances and make recommendations or provide model ordinances? That's another good resource. We worked recently with, in Bucks County, the Bucks County Planning Commission, to completely redo Warrington's zoning and subdivision and land development ordinance. They came on as a consultant. We had meetings that were open to the public, where we reviewed the ordinance as a whole and came up with a new ordinance that works a lot better. So, there's always areas that can use help and can use improvement.
Question number 3, you said you had done that work for, in Warrington down, what year was that, do you know?
Which one? The conservation residential?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to estimate maybe 2020, and I'm sorry if that's not the exact year. Right.
It wasn't 20 years ago.
No. I've been out in Bucks County this is my 8th year now. So before that, I wouldn't have represented Warrington because I wasn't out here.
Yeah,
So.
okay. Moving right along to page 2. What types of labor and personnel issues have you had to negotiate, and can you tell us about an experience?
Sure, so we have worked on personnel policies for our municipalities. I have assisted them both with heart and lung claims, they have police departments, heart and lung claims, as well as workers' compensation claims. Internal disputes, we have been brought in sometimes when there was recommendations needed with regard to perhaps how staff should be, what level they should be at, that sort of thing. Interior staffing issues, I guess, is the best way to describe it. I'm trying to think. those are probably some of the best examples. Usually like personnel policies, there's another gentleman in our office who, he gets the unlikable job when someone needs to be terminated, of being the one who has to give them that information. So I can't tell you that that's me, but we do have someone in our office who does that.
Can you give an example or explain how you've handled hot or emotional discussions in township meetings?
Sure.
Why are you laughing?
I'm assuming there's been that experience here before.
Just a couple times.
Sure. So it typically depends on whether we're expected to take the lead on that or whether the township manager handles that. I find that a lot of interactions with residents is just listening to people and not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to form or express an opinion at that point. Sometimes it requires actual, taking it back and thinking it over and coming up with a good solution possibly that either, if it's two residents who aren't getting along, trying to sort of mediate between the two of them. If it's a complaint about something that the township has done, sometimes it's just that there's information that needs to be shared with the residents that they don't necessarily understand what the process was or how the decision became arrived at. So certainly, talking to residents, making more information available is one way to help address it.
Okay. Have you ever experienced where you've had to step in, like in a actual meeting because there was yelling or do we just use the gavel and tell people
Yes, so.
to pipe down?
Yes, and in actuality, in some of our municipalities where there were police departments, we've had police officers attend meetings in case there was an issue. We have a township that has panic buttons underneath.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had a zoning hearing board meeting where a resident challenged our chairperson and we had to diffuse the situation so that it didn't go any further. So yes, unfortunately, yes, I have dealt with that previously.
Okay.
And just as an aside, there's, unfortunately, with things going on now, as you know, in another part of this state, there was a shooting at a township building. One of my townships, everyone who worked there, including the consultants, the engineer, the attorneys, we actually attended active shooter training to learn how to deal with something like that should somebody come into the township with a weapon.
Okay.
When was that?
The active shooter training?
No, the shooting itself.
I don't remember when it was. It was a couple years ago, though. Someone went into a township building and unfortunately started shooting, and that's when we, at least one of our townships got bulletproof glass all the way around the entryway. We got ballistic and bulletproof in the dais where they sat so that they would be better protected. We had a whole inventory done by the police to determine where we could have better safety.
Okay.
This is a pretty generic question, but what is your experience with historical buildings?
Historical buildings. So I've represented at least one township in the past that had their own historic district. Not too much except for, I would say, preservation, just having ordinances that actively encourage historic preservation. We do have some historic resources again down in Wrightstown. We have a library. We just recently preserved an octagonal school, and we're working on bids to have a new roof put on because it's actually an old cedar shake roof, and they want it to be authentic to the building itself. So we're going through, I'm helping the engineer go through that bidding process, and fortunately we didn't get any bids, but.
Something I just learned, it's not very easy to get historical funding.
No, not to get funding, and also originally it was recommended, so for that example, originally it was recommended that we have somebody, there's apparently like a cedar shake society, and there are contractors who belong to it, and they recommended that we only use contractors that belong to it, but we reached out to all of them and no one was interested in bidding. So I think that's gonna be one of the things that ends up coming out of the bid, is that they have to be a member of that organization.
Yeah, I just spoke with a gentleman who talked about doing that cedar shake shingle on the roof. He said that alone it was the most expensive upkeep, and now there's a metal roof on the building. That's what they said, but they fought for it, just like you said, and then once he got it, he was like, it was just too much. So
Right.
now they put a metal roof on there, so yeah, that's funny.
Well, my fingers are crossed for them that they don't find that it's too much and that they can actually do it so that it stays,
It's the maintenance.
it keeps the historic nature of it.
Sure.
So.
Can you provide an example of dealing with a difficult code enforcement issue and how you guided the township towards resolution?
Sure. So let me think of a couple examples. Code enforcement, we actually have one going on now that has to do with what we would consider a mobile sign, which is a big landscaping truck that is sitting in a business right now with its name all over it that we cited. It went to the Court of Common Pleas and they found in favor of the township. It's now at the Commonwealth Court and we're just waiting for a briefing schedule on that. I'm trying to think that we had one of the biggest issues I think in code enforcement that's coming out these days, and this was actually a number of years ago, is residents that sometimes have hoarding situations. And in that case, we had to post, the property unfortunately was completely uninhabitable. And we helped the resident to get resources, we contacted the county, we had to get dumpsters in order to get some of the stuff out of there. And hopefully, in the end, the resident was able to go back into the home and hopefully it didn't get that way again. But that's kind of the biggest extreme that I can think of.
Okay, great. What types of ethical minefields would you advise us to avoid? And are there best practices?
Ethical minefields,
Yes.
okay. Well, one of the best practices for township supervisors is to be careful to stay neutral, to not provide opinions in public, especially if you have applications that are going to be coming before you, to be upfront if you do have a conflict, to disclose it, immediately, to not participate in any voting if there is an issue or something that you're connected with, to remember to fill out your ethical forms every year that we have to file, our financial disclosure forms that are important, and to be aware of the Ethics Act that's out there for municipal officials, and to be aware of what your responsibilities are under that act.
Okay, great.
Have you guys ever had any ethic problems?
No, I mean, we've had some conflicts that have had to have been disclosed, but we've never come across anything where either an official didn't file the right disclosure or was actually receiving a benefit from someone who came before them or anything like that, no.
Can you provide an example when you had to deliver bad news to a township?
Oh, sure, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly there are ways in which townships want to proceed to do things. Maybe it's through a faster channel because it's something that needs to get done. So sometimes you have to tell townships that they have to stop and slow down. You can't just, go out and get a contract